When Todd Boehly walked through the doors of Stamford Bridge in May 2022, Chelsea fans were filled with optimism. The American businessman promised a new era of success, backed by serious investment. Fast forward 3 years, and that investment has reached a staggering £1.2 billion across over 50 signings. Yet, instead of consistent glory, we've witnessed one of the most chaotic periods in Chelsea's modern history. Today, we're examining 10 talented players whose careers have been derailed by Boehly's scattergun approach to transfers and the revolving door of managers that has seen Thomas Tuchel, Graham Potter, Mauricio Pochettino, and now Enzo Maresca all try to make sense of this bloated mess. Let's start with perhaps the most shocking fall from grace. Kalidou Koulibaly arrived at Chelsea as one of the world's premier centre-backs, having spent 8 magnificent years at Napoli, where he was virtually unbeatable. The Senegalese international was everything Chelsea needed: experience, leadership, and proven quality at the highest level. Yet within 12 months, he was shipped off to Saudi Arabia's Al Hilal, his reputation in tatters. Koulibaly's struggles weren't entirely his fault. The 31-year-old was asked to adapt to a completely different style of play in the Premier League, while the club around him descended into chaos. Thomas Tuchel, who specifically requested his signing, was sacked just days after the transfer window closed. Graham Potter's arrival meant a tactical overhaul that never suited Koulibaly's strengths. Instead of being given time to adapt, something any world-class player deserves, he was immediately written off and sold for a fraction of his potential value. Speaking of Tuchel's departing legacy, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang's story reads like a comedy of errors. The former Arsenal and Barcelona striker was brought to Chelsea specifically at Tuchel's request, with the German manager convinced he could reignite the Gabonese forward's career. The problem? Tuchel was fired just 4 days after Aubameyang's arrival. Graham Potter showed absolutely no interest in the experienced striker, relegating him to the bench and treating him like an unwanted guest at a dinner party. Aubameyang managed just 3 goals in 21 appearances before being shipped off to Marseille on loan, later making a permanent move. Here was a player who had scored 68 goals in 128 appearances for Arsenal, yet couldn't get a fair shot because Boehly decided to sack the manager who specifically wanted him. Denis Zakaria's time at Chelsea perfectly encapsulates everything wrong with Boehly's approach. The Swiss midfielder arrived on loan from Juventus with high expectations. He was a regular for both club and country, known for his physicality and technical ability. Yet he found himself completely marginalized in a squad that was growing more overcrowded by the day. Zakaria later opened up about his struggles, admitting he suffered a lot during his stint at Stamford Bridge. Despite Kante being injured for large portions of the season, Potter simply refused to give the Swiss international meaningful minutes. It was a classic case of a talented player being signed without any clear plan for integration. The obligation to buy clause was never triggered, and Zakaria moved to Monaco, where he's since flourished, proving that the problem was never his ability. Few transfer sagas better illustrate Chelsea's destructive approach than Romeo Lavia. The young Belgian midfielder was courted by both Liverpool and Chelsea, with Jurgen Klopp's side making repeated bids. However, he chose Chelsea, seduced by their ambitious project and financial offer. That decision has haunted him ever since. His first season was decimated by injuries, limiting him to just 32 minutes of Premier League action. When fit, he found himself competing with Moises Caicedo and Enzo Fernandez for minutes, a battle he was never going to win given Chelsea's massive investments in those players. At Liverpool, Lavia would have been nurtured and developed gradually. Instead, he's become another casualty of Chelsea's numbers game, struggling to establish himself in an impossibly crowded midfield. Nicholas Jackson's situation perfectly demonstrates Boehly's lack of strategic thinking. The young Senegalese striker was signed from Villarreal as a prospect for the future, yet was immediately thrust into the role of Chelsea's main striker, a responsibility that should have belonged to a more experienced player. Jackson's raw talent is undeniable, but expecting a 22-year-old to regularly lead the line for a club of Chelsea's stature was always unrealistic, the Haalands of the world aside. His inconsistent finishing and physical struggles against Premier League defenders were predictable growing pains, yet he received little support from above. Now, with the arrivals of new strikers, he finds himself on the outs with Chelsea, desperate to get rid. Benoit Badiashile arrived from Monaco in January 2023 as a £35 million investment in the future. The young French defender showed glimpses of his potential, but was never given the consistent run of games needed to develop properly. In a more stable environment, Badiashile would have been slowly integrated into the team while learning from experienced defenders. Instead, he found himself competing with an ever-growing list of centre-backs as Chelsea continued to sign more players in his position. His opportunities became increasingly limited, relegated mainly to Conference League appearances. Axel Disas's rapid fall from grace tells a familiar story. Under Mauricio Pochettino, the French defender was a regular starter, showing his versatility by playing both centre-back and right-back. His physicality and aerial ability made him valuable in both positions, and it seemed like he'd found his place in the squad. However, Enzo Maresca's arrival after Pochettino's unfair sacking at the hands of Boehly changed everything. The Italian coach had different ideas about his defensive setup, and Disasi quickly found himself on the periphery. By the end of last season, he was shipped out on loan to Aston Villa, highlighting how quickly a player's fortunes can change at this chaotic club. The increased competition in defence meant there was simply no room for a player who had been contributing regularly just months earlier. Cesare Casadei arrived from Inter Milan in 2022 with genuine excitement from Chelsea supporters. The young Italian midfielder was seen as a potential heir to the likes of Roberto Di Matteo and Jorginho, a creative force who could bridge the gap between midfield and attack. Instead, his Chelsea career became a series of loan moves and false dawns. Despite showing promise at Leicester during their championship-winning campaign, Casadei never got a real chance at Chelsea. The midfield was simply too crowded, with established stars like Caicedo, Fernandes and Cole Palmer taking all the minutes. After just 17 appearances in 2.5 years, he was sold to Torino, another talented youngster whose development was stunted by poor planning. Perhaps no story better illustrates the current madness at Chelsea than Kiernan Dewsbury Hall's brief stint. The midfielder was the star of Leicester's championship-winning campaign, earning Player of the Season honours and cementing his status as a fan favourite. When Enzo Maresca moved to Chelsea, bringing the Englishman with him seemed logical. However, the reunion never worked as planned. Despite his familiarity with Maresca's system, Dewsbury Hall found himself competing with an abundance of midfield talent. He managed just 2 Premier League starts, becoming mainly a Conference League player where he did show his quality with 4 goals. His sale after just 1 season exemplifies Chelsea's scattergun approach, signing players without proper planning for their integration, then discarding them when the inevitable squad bloat becomes unmanageable. David Datro Fofana's Chelsea career reads like a series of missed opportunities. The young striker arrived from Molde with a decent goal-scoring record, yet was never given a genuine chance to prove himself at Stamford Bridge. Instead, he's been shipped out on 3 different loans in 2 seasons, most recently to Göztepe in Turkey. Each loan move has felt like an admission that Chelsea had no real plan for his development. Rather than integrating him gradually or finding the right temporary home, he's been bounced around different leagues and styles of play. For a young striker, this constant upheaval has been devastating for his confidence and development trajectory. The chaos doesn't end there. Diego Moreira, the promising Portuguese winger, played just once for Chelsea before being sold to Strasbourg via Lyon. His brief stint was so forgettable that many fans wouldn't recognise his name, yet he represented another £8 million investment that yielded nothing. Leslie Ugochukwu suffered a similar fate. After minimal opportunities under Pochettino, he was loaned to Southampton, where he couldn't prevent their relegation. His subsequent sale to Burnley for £15 million represented another loss on Chelsea's books and another young career disrupted by poor planning. Then there's Renato Veiga, whose half-season at Chelsea ended with a loan move that has left his future uncertain. These players weren't given time to develop or prove themselves. They were simply swept up in the transfer frenzy and discarded when convenient. What connects all these stories is the complete absence of a coherent strategy. Chelsea's squad became so bloated that at one point they had 42 senior players, an impossible number to manage effectively. The constant and sometimes unfair managerial changes have only made matters worse. Each new coach brings different tactical preferences, meaning players who fit one system are immediately surplus to requirements under the next. This isn't sustainable football management, it's chaos dressed up as ambition. 3 years into the Boehly era, the evidence is clear. Throwing money at a problem without proper planning creates more problems than it solves. These players represent over £300 million worth of talent that has been mismanaged, undermined, or simply discarded. The tragedy is that some of them have gone on to find success elsewhere, while others look to have been permanently damaged by the experience. Chelsea's inability to create an environment where all their talent can flourish is a serious problem, and until that changes, we can expect more casualties in the ongoing disaster that is Boehly's Chelsea revolution.